Good morning. My name's Jordan Marshall and I'm Special Projects Editor at Building Magazine. Love to welcome you to what I'm sure is going to be another great session in this edition of Winning Work in Education and Healthcare. I'm really excited to be chairing this one today. And this session's entitled, What Does the Revamped New Hospitals Program Mean for the Industry? We have a great panel for you today, who I'd love to introduce now. We've got Corinne Godsmark, Health Customer Account Director at BAM, Victoria Head, Commercial and Performance Director at Arcus, and Jamie Johnston, Board Director and Head of Global Systems at Bryden Wood. I'd just love to run through for you all exactly how today is going to go. Each of our expert speakers is going to give a presentation on their overall thoughts on the topic before we come together for a Q&A. We'd love for our audience to get as involved as they can, so please send through questions at any time. We'll try and get through as many of those as we can in the group discussion part at the end of the session. Finally, I'd just like to flag that these sessions are available on demand for up to 12 months via the same link you've joined right now. We always get asked that. So yes, please feel free to watch again after the session or share with a colleague who you think would find it interesting. That's probably enough for me to kick things off. So I'm going to hand over to Corinne to get things started for us.
So, good morning, everybody. It's great to see everybody. I'm just checking that everybody can see my slides. So, a little introduction to myself, Corinne Godsmark, been with BAM not long, joined in 2023. I'm really pleased to be sort of heading up the lead sort of customer role with regard the health sector. I won't read everything out there, but if you'd like to reach out to me, talk about healthcare, talk about BAM, talk about construction, please reach out on my email there below. So sorry, I'm having a technical hitch here. I can't seem to move the screen on.
If you just hit the arrow to the right, it should move to the next slide.
Okay. Nope. Sorry.
If not, do you want to maybe stop sharing and reshare the screen?
Of course.
Sorry, we did practice. That's okay, Corinne. Selena or I will pull it up. If you just want to keep talking, we'll get the slides up our side. If you stop sharing.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, it's just not happening now. Perfect. Okay, so done my introduction. If we could move to the third slide, that'd be fantastic. So apologies for that. So really, what I wanted to talk about is a number of things, but I want to start with that this is a once in a lifetime opportunity, and then I'm going to move into sort of three key aspects of what I think will make the program successful, and we'll talk about some challenges and opportunities in there, and then I'll just have a summary. So can we just push the button next? That'd be great. So firstly, this is all about NHS infrastructure. This is a really, really once in a lifetime to improve the buildings and more importantly, improve the environment for medical care. This is what this is about. Next button, please. Of course, hot topic, net zero. Anything new, we need to make sure we consider. You may be aware that the hospital NHS service is looking to target net zero by 2040. So by the time this program matures, we should be hitting those targets. So everything we should do on this program needs to consider that target. But you may not know that actually the NHS is also looking to target an 80% reduction in carbon by 28 to 32. So again, this program will be at a level of maturity that needs to make sure we hit those targets. Next, please. Now, for me, one of the key aspects for this, and this is putting my contractor hat on, is making sure that there's a program approach. Two things really on there, and I'll speak a little bit more, is security of pipeline, and also making sure as a group, as a framework, as a program, we drive those efficiencies through continuous learning. And how we're going to do that, collaboration is key. It's an overused word, I agree, but actually what we need to do is change our behaviors. We need to move away from the adversarial typical contract into working together and having a single goal of delivering great hospitals and ultimately a great program. Next, please. How we're going to do this? Well, my colleagues on this panel will talk about this in a little bit more detail, but it's absolutely essential that we do have a standardized component approach. We have standardized requirements, and actually we bring efficiency by repeating, learning, and repeating. Next. And there's plenty of examples emerging, and I think, well, I know Jamie will talk about a couple of aspects around the MOJ, the Department for Education, and even the private sector market, where actually they've they've been working on an alliancing and programming approach, and actually getting real value and quality products at the end of that process. Next slide, please. So I'm going to talk on the next three slides, challenges and opportunities. And there's no doubt, many of you on this call, I'm sure, have spoken to the new hospital program team. And one of the biggest challenges is capability and capacity within the market. And I think if you look at the NAO recent audit, one of the points they raised is there's only 4, I think they mentioned, contractors that are really committed in delivering these big complex hospitals. We need those big contractors to do that, but actually at the same time they could constrain the program. So why don't we look at a different alternative, a different model, looking at the regional contractor market as well, opening that up? And how would we do that on major size projects? Well, actually, what about splitting those projects down into programs themselves? What about prioritizing the healthcare needs of that particular trust and spending 50 to 150 million pound on phase 1? This approach spreads the work and actually opens up a larger pipeline for the NHP. So what I would like to see is some innovative thinking around that procurement and that capability piece. And again, that repeats really for the supply chain, doesn't it? If we see a good program of work, there's relationships, and we can fish in the national and the regional markets. Again, that's going to give us more breadth and depth in the supply chain. And for me, I will emphasize this a lot today. What we do need to see is a program of pipeline which is funded. Too many schemes don't have the funding, and they get stuck, and that causes challenges for the industry. So again, one key message for the NHP is really saying, how can we look at this program? How can we align the capacity with that program? Absolutely essential. And I think the next thing I'd like to just mention is these are one in a lifetime opportunities for trusts. And actually, you won't be doing these projects again. And actually, there's a steep learning curves. So again, why don't we look at innovating around the trust teams moving from project to project, as a minimum, cross-sharing and collaborating and learning lessons and helping support each other. So I just think I would like to see some innovation and challenge around the norm there. Next slide, please. So Jamie will talk a bit more about the design, but you would have heard about the Hospital 2.0. We absolutely support that actually having a standardized design is the right travel of direction. But the key message I've got here today is, let's not run before we can walk. It's going to be an iterative process. We aren't going to have the perfect solution on project 1. The opportunity to develop Hospital 2.0, standardize and improve is essential. And I think that's a key message for the NHP. Car industry does it, tech industry does it, Gen 1, Gen 2, etc., etc. And driving that will be standardized components. And from that, let's consider the benefits of having products that we can utilize, we can use, and we can repeat. They've got to improve quality. They've got to improve speed of delivery. And ultimately, they also need to improve maintainability as well. We need to think about the whole life. And we store that information. Let's think about how we store that information on a platform. I think the challenge we have there is question around IP, but also, do we have a standard platform where we as the contractors pull that design from, or do the contractors have their own platforms? Whatever, we need to move into that direction, because that will drive absolute efficiency, and certainly as a minimum will reduce the sort of traditional design program. And linking all that together, there does need to be robust clinical and technical briefs. We do need to remove away from the classic derogation schedules, and actually, but at the same time, the creation of innovation, the creation of ideas needs to mean that we actually do have new HBNs, new HTMs, to actually drive this whole process forward. And the robust approvals that I mentioned there, this is about government funding. This is about getting things signed off. We need that process to be efficient. We can't wait around as an industry to say, yes, we've got the funding. So I'm expecting to see a much aligned process and speedier process. Next slide, please. So collaboration is absolutely key, isn't it, for this to work? We know that, I think, and actually setting that collaboration, we absolutely need an alliance approach. We need fair contract terms right through the supply chain. We don't want to be, the traditional contract of where maybe the contractor takes the pain and then we pass that down to the lowest common denominator. That's not right for this particular environment at all. What we need is a carrot approach and not a stick approach. And we have to have integrated teams. Everybody needs to know their roles. Everybody needs a part in this process. Everybody needs to add value. And actually, if we start thinking about this as the program, we start thinking about this as actually benefiting the nation's health, actually, we will start to get that sea change. But we also need to be disciplined as well and change behaviours where we need to. And then finally there, the shared learning again goes without saying, but actually, why can't one contractor go and help support another contractor? Why can't we do peer reviews on each other's work to get real progress? That's the shift that we need. Next, please. So in summary, just press the next 3 buttons, that'll be fine. So in summary, I just want to emphasize the following. We need a committed planned program, and I believe NHP absolutely understands that. We need to go and move forward in a standardized design to robust requirements, but let's not run before we walk. Let's get it right. Let's have a iterative process, and let's look for that continuous improvement. And again, let's do it collaboratively and fairly. And if we do all of that, let's press the button. That's the end game, isn't it? What we're after is a sustainable NHS infrastructure. But the most important thing is that you and I, our families and the nation get improved health and well-being. So that's me done. Thank you for your time. I apologise for the technical issues and I look forward to any questions.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Brent. That was a great way of kicking things off. We've already got a couple of questions coming through, but they're ones I'd actually love to put to the whole panel. So I might hang on to them for the Q&A at the end. Next, we're going to hear from Victoria. So Victoria, if you're all right to share your screen, I'll hand over to you.
Great stuff. Morning, everyone. I'm just going to open my slides. Hopefully they've come through.
Yep, that's perfect.
Good stuff. So thanks for having me back on the panel. It's great to be back this year. And we're starting with the discussion about what does the revamped new hospital programme mean for the industry? And I put the inverted commas for a very particular reason, in that I think there's more evolution of the new hospital programme that will come. It would be remiss not to mention the NAO report that Corin mentioned and the public accountancy that was last week. I think it's worth mentioning that It's very normal for major programmes to be audited and to test whether they're on the right track for delivery. There is the outcomes of the feedback from the NAO and Public Accounts Committees that there is still some work to do for the NHP, and that links to some discussions we were having offline actually around that the new hospital programme was formed, and many analogy has been used, but as you know, in flight and still building the plane really. So recognition that there's still a lot of work to do, and that's where I think all of us can come in and to support the NHP in bringing forward innovation and learning and experience from other industries, plus where healthcare has been delivered successfully in the UK and internationally, to help form how the NHP could evolve and move on. Standardisation is at the heart of what the new hospital programme are trying to achieve, and the reason I popped this slide up was that it's standardisation through the whole project life cycle. And whilst for many of us within the main part of the built environment, the standardisation links to the kit of parts and the construction and build methodology, there's a whole load of standardisation that needs to happen prior to that. And that links to one of Corinne's points about making sure that our scope and our brief are really clear. There's huge amounts of work being undertaken in looking at how we can standardise the approach to understanding the clinical need for each of us within trusts, within regions, to work out how many beds, how many theatres, X-ray machines, etc., etc. Previously, that's all been done without any baseline information. So there's a large amount of work that happens in those very early stages that directly links to the way we can work together to support the NHP and NHS trusts in bringing forward solutions that are aligned to standardised approaches. Ensuring that our clinical plans and our briefs are clear are an absolute enabler for the industry to respond in a very meaningful way. So no longer should it be around not knowing how big a bedroom is or how big an ensuite is or where the ensuite is placed. There is no end of evidence that can be used to demonstrate where we know how rooms and spaces operate in a safe way for the patients, but also then aligning that to the build methodology. We talked about the kit parts and components, and very, very normal in many other industries, and that's something that we need to move towards. I think we're all very clear that we shouldn't be getting to endless catalogues of different bedhead systems or different tracking systems within rooms, etc. There's a way that we can hone those down and bring much more evidence-based selection to each project. The evolutionary cost data is really important for us, because unfortunately it's not something that's collected centrally by the NHS, but there is a wealth of information out there on how much healthcare schemes have cost in terms of outturns, and there is something to be had around looking back and learning from that, from the commercial part of that, to know how then they should be used for baselining of costing now, but also then applying some of the proposed savings and efficiencies to see how affordable the next schemes are. And Corinne talked a lot around the procurement approach. Something has to change to ensure that healthcare shakes off maybe some of its previous reputation of being not the best industry to work in, because there's many changes, there's delays, etc. There's a new approach needed that engages the supply chain by bringing forward the pipeline and being very clear on the scope of that pipeline. And I really like the idea that Corinne mentioned of, actually, is there something that could move in the teams around, so that we see what good looks like, we learn from it and we evolve it on again. These are a few just images that we've been working on at Arcus for a long time on standardised rooms. So from the very beginning of looking at what the demand and capacity modelling is needed, but then translating that into schedules of accommodation and then design briefs. We think that over 70% of a standard hospital, of the GIFA of a standard hospital, can be standardised. And what's really important in looking at how we can move into standardised designs is aligning some of the assumptions that are being made around clinical planning and the design output. And an example is that for anybody that watched the Public Accounts Committee last week, there was quite a lot of challenge around the occupancy rates that are going to be used for inpatient bedrooms. That has a direct correlation with where we place our ensuite within an inpatient bedroom. If we're going to go ahead with a 95% occupancy, which means that then the bedrooms are used much longer, much better. We have much better utilisation of those spaces. The access to the ensuite must be from the corridor and not within the room, because if we need to be in the room for maintenance or for problems that arise, the utilisation rate will be directly impacted. So tying those two together, and I'd say that sometimes that part of the process isn't truly connected within our industry of the built environment. It's something that I think is incumbent upon all of us to make sure that that happens. Learning and evolution has got to be at the centre of this. I think there's never been a better time to learn, but there are some wonderful examples of where things have gone well within the UK and further afield of what has been delivered on time, to budget and to an excellent standard, but that's never really captured. And having the ability to look programmatically across at learning from previous schemes, plus also then how that impacts and can influence future schemes, is really, really important. In doing that, I think we need to all be open to challenge, and that's challenge as to how we've always done things, how we come together as teams, as supply chains, but also in how we challenge them, our clients. We have access to a much wider pool of international experience to be able to share with our clients who are, they're running hospitals under a lot of pressure. It's for us to bring that innovation to the table and share that with them. The evolve, not dispose, is really important, because I think for too long it's very quick. We've been very quick to just tear up what was done previously, and actually this is an evolutionary process, and so it should be. The DFE has been through something similar of where it started over 10, 12 years ago in wanting to implement a programmatic approach, and what we must do is keep the evolution at the heart of it, and not to keep disposing of things and just tearing things up. Collaboration is very much at the centre. Corinne talked very passionately about it. It's something that myself and Arcus are extremely committed to, bringing teams together that can work together with removing some of the boundaries. And when I've been talking to a number of the supply chains more recently, the majority of them talk to how things changed during COVID and how those barriers started to come down because there was a greater purpose. And if we think about this based on outcomes, there's a chance that we can then move this on again. Bringing forward innovation, I've mentioned DFE, Corinne mentioned the MOJ, and I think Jamie's going to as well. There's so much that's being done out in other sectors that it's important that we learn from, and we can bring elements of that forward. However, there's a cautionary note that I think has to be remembered with healthcare, is that healthcare is very specialist. This isn't the same as building student accommodation that is boxes on top of boxes. They're highly technical, and also the outcome part of that links to this, in that these are patients' care and rehabilitation that are at the heart of it. So what's next? I think importantly for the NHP, and it was an action that came out of the Public Accounts Committee's clarity on actually which hospitals will be prioritised and progressed. The RAC trusts have come forward because of the urgent need for action. I think it will be interesting to see how, with the work that is being done with education on RAC, and then what will come forward within healthcare of the issues with RAC, how the industry can support both of them. The need is very much equal for both of them, and how can we come together to make sure that we can bring solutions and to reduce the risk for children and patients. The need for the industry to come forward and identify what they can support and what they can't. So being pragmatic about where is best placed for each of us within the supply chain, and where we can then bring others in to support in maybe bigger ventures of more significant programs if we're working with a number of trusts, etc. And finally, really important that we consider how we support the wider supply chain's involvement. So all the way through the supply chain of some of the more specialists that are very small operators, but how we can bring those on to be part of that, because there is no getting away from the fact that capacity is needed in an industry that is very short on skills, and therefore the adaptation of the way we move into using more modern ways of designing and constructing things means that we have the ability to bring through a much wider and varied supply chain. That's it from me. My email if anyone wants to get in touch, and then I think I'm handing over to Jamie.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Victoria. That was another great presentation. Yes, Jamie, if you wouldn't mind wrapping things up for us, just while I have the audience, I would just like to flag, yes, the session will be available on demand, and yes, the slides are available via the the resources tab. So everything's there. Jamie, if you're ready.
Okay.
Brilliant.
Can you see my slides? That's obviously the first thing to check.
Perfect. Yeah.
Brilliant. Okay. Hi all. Thanks for joining. Yeah, my name is Jamie Johnson at Bryden Wood. So as a company, Bryden Wood have been working with lots of departments within the UK government for over a decade now, shaping the way that we transforming the way that we deliver social infrastructure in schools, prisons, those sorts of things. So we've obviously been leveraging digital technologies, modern methods construction, some of the things that have been talked about. But perhaps more importantly, we've been working with departments to develop value-driven, evidence-based design processes to improve outcomes overall. So we actually worked with the NHP from start of January 2021 until February this year. So we had a sort of couple of year period where we were working with them. Initially, we were brought in to look at the MMC strategy. And that soon sort of evolved into helping to bring in some of the other learnings that Corinne and Victoria talked about from other departments. So one of the things that's been obviously referenced a lot is this Hospital 2.0. The NAO report talks about some pretty big numbers. So it talks about a cost reduction of 25%. It talks about program reduction of 20%. So those are quite big claims. That would mean 4 hospitals for the price of 3. So I thought it was worth sort of unpacking where some of those figures have come from. So if you saw the parliamentary committee, Natalie Forrest referenced the prisons programme particularly and commercial offices. So I thought it was worth explaining some of the background. So one of the things that hasn't been, I think, talked about nearly enough is that NHP is actually learning from all these other different departments. So I think there's a fantastic story around the way that NHP is taking best practice from other departments, combining it, and that's starting to drive some of the figures that you've seen. So if I start with the prisons programme, we were brought in 2016 by the Ministry of Justice to look at the prison estate transformation programmes. This was a 1.2 billion programme, 10,000 new prison places. The driver was to facilitate a more rehabilitative estate. So it's on the MOJ website that the cost of reoffending is about £18 billion to the taxpayer every year. So the ask was, if you could develop a prison which was more rehabilitative, you would start to drive down that cost. Obviously, you would improve the lives of prisoners, of victims of crime, all of these things. You'd have a massive societal benefit. So we use this quite simple diagram as a sort of guiding principle for every meeting. So on the bottom axis, that's how efficiently we can deliver these things. So how quickly, how cheaply. So this is application of modern methods construction, economies of scale, these sorts of things. The other axis is the effectiveness of the prisons. That's how rehabilitative it is. So we said, look, if you don't focus on the effectiveness first, you'll just end up doing a kind of cheap, cut price version of the thing you've done before. So our job was to help MOJ really understand everything they could do to facilitate rehabilitation. So we did a huge piece of work engaging lots of different stakeholders, academics and things. And the constant ask was, can we do things that will help prisoners? So this is creating the sorts of adjacencies that encourage the right sorts of interactions. It's facilitating interaction between prisoners and staff, all these sorts of things. So in a healthcare context, you can imagine that sort of getting the best possible clinical adjacencies, the best possible inpatient bedrooms, all the things Victoria's talked about. Once you've done that, then you can start to apply the kind of kit parts, then start to ideally move up into the top right hand of that diagram. But this was our sort of guiding principle for every meeting, is it helping us to move into that corner. The outcome of that piece of work was, a very standardized but super optimized prison block. It had tons of innovation. We got rid of bars from windows. It was a much more normalizing environment. So the comment there about there was more innovation in 18 months than the previous century was, one of the best bits of feedback we got. But this standardization also underpins the alliancing model. The contractors were able to share information, and that's helping them to get better engagement with the supply chain. It's quicker to deploy these things because there's not the ramp up and the design fees and things. So that kind of standardization principle was driving all sorts of efficiencies, which is obviously where some of these sort of numbers are coming from. That program was also the start of this idea of platforms. So we started saying, could you also develop kits of parts that were not just good for Ministry of Justice, but that other departments, you could start to take the same components and put them into schools and healthcare and housing and start to get those economies of scale and start to really make that manufacturing mind shift. So that program was the start of the platform approach, which hopefully people have heard government talk about. It was the thing that kick-started the Construction Innovation Hub. It's become a central tenet now of government policy, is trying to get repeatable common solutions that we can deploy at scale, because that's how we start to become more like manufacturing, and that's how we drive the cost down of these things. The other case study that Natalie briefly referenced was commercial offices. So actually the first deployment of platforms was a scheme in the private sector. So this is something we did for Landsec. It's an office building called the Forge. It was handed over earlier this year, and it was the first building to sort of bring together this sort of platform approach. So there's been tons written about the Forge. If you Google it, you can find all sorts of information on the case studies, but some of the key metrics, the superstructure was designed as a sort of carrier frame that demonstrated how you could double productivity in delivering superstructure. The accuracy of that allowed the rest of the building to be a kit of parts. So the facade panels you see here, at peak, one was being installed every 6 minutes. So that's a kind of order of magnitude quicker than traditional construction. So this building is also the first net zero commercial office in the UK. We took out 30% of the embodied carbons. There's loads of key metrics from this building, which you can start to see how you might employ some of those things in the healthcare space. One of the bits I'm going to talk about is the MEP. Apologies for the text in the middle of that slide. So this was the MEP cassettes that were used for the Forge. So I think about 40%, maybe 50% of healthcare is mechanical electrical systems. So again, I'm not saying that this is directly repeatable, but this is how we approached it for the Forge. So because we had a very rational superstructure, we could then standardize the manufacture of the MEP cassettes. So NG Bailey, who put these together, set up their factory with bench tops where people would drop these cassettes on, stack a series of cassettes together, literally wheel them out onto the truck, wheel those onto the floor plate, and then we had specially adapted forklifts to lift these things up. All of the fixing points were kind of pre-cast into the slab. So this is starting to, properly get some manufacturing type thinking into the installation phase. These were the sorts of metrics we got. So when the team started, they were using Genie lifts. So this is kind of industry best practice. Once they got the hang of the forklifts, that installation time absolutely collapsed. So again, I appreciate that an office is not nearly as complicated as a hospital. Obviously, MEP in hospital is more complex. You've got infection control things, there's future flexibility, there's maintainability. So there's a whole raft of reasons why you can't simply pick up this thinking and apply it straight to healthcare. But you could imagine a version of this applied to healthcare. One thing that's worth mentioning, this is obviously just a one-off project. So even on a single project, these were the sorts of benefits we were getting. You could imagine if you could scale that up, and one thing the NHP has got is massive scale, then you can imagine a version of this applied at scale. And again, how some of these figures from the NEO report start to sound much more plausible. Again, one of the useful things that we're able to do through this approach, we've very tightly integrated the mechanical electrical systems with the superstructure. So we actually reduced the floor-to-floor height of the building quite significantly. That meant the entire building volume was less, and therefore there's less air to heat and treat. And so we could get more building within a kind of given volume, but also it's a much more efficient building. So again, the idea of applying some of these thinkings to NHP starts to give you some inklings into how you could start to really get hold of huge benefits. And it looks amazing. It looks like a very well ordered, very well organized asset. You can imagine it's very easy to maintain, to replace, to the whole life benefit of this approach is almost apparent from this slide. Last little case study that I'll mention. I'm conscious that, as Victoria says, that healthcare is a very specific sector. And I'm conscious that often we show these case studies and people go, yeah, but have you done it in healthcare? So this is a project we did for Circle Health. It's a private healthcare facility. But you can see here the metrics. We delivered this at about 30% cost compared to traditional healthcare building. So again, it's a private healthcare facility, but again, this is further evidence that these metrics are achievable if the NHP sort of chooses to adopt certain things at scale. So all of this sort of stuff came together in the thinking around Hospital 2.0. So we put this diagram together to show all the different levels at which you would need to develop some thinking or standardization. So at the very bottom there is the kind of kit of parts. But hopefully in the forge you've seen how that thinking might be translated. But as Corinne said earlier, if you don't start at a higher level with very well-written requirements, if the brief isn't very well written, then you never get your hands on the benefits. We said these are the sorts of levels where NHP could be starting to think. So if you had each of these kind of levels sorted, you can imagine a suite of individual spaces which are incredibly well designed and optimized, a series of clinical adjacencies which are then also very well optimized, a set of rules for how you configure the departments that would mean that, for instance, there's limited circulation space. That would have a benefit for patients because the journeys would be easier. It would have a benefit for staff because travel distances would be less. But also you could make generally more compact, more clinically dense facilities. So you can have a smaller facility for the same amount of clinical content. And again, you can start to imagine that that's how you start to drive down the cost. So when you've got very highly optimized facilities at every one of these levels delivered through a kit of parts, hopefully you can suddenly start to see how all of the things that we've done are starting to come together and why those numbers in the NAO report are actually really believable, that given the scale of the NHP and the ability to do this properly, the size of the prize is vast. I'm going to stop there, but shameless plug, if you're interested in some of these topics, there's tons of stuff on the website. There's a load of stuff around reference design specifically and some of the platform stuff. So again, if you wanted sort of further evidence as to how this approach has been adopted elsewhere, then these might be a good starting point. So I will stop there, and hopefully there's plenty of time for questions and answers.
Brilliant. Thank you all so much. That was 3 really informative presentations and covered a lot of ground there. So there's definitely a few questions coming in from the audience. So I'm going to jump straight into their questions before I pepper in a few of my own. So there's been I'm going to try and roll a couple of questions in together here. So there's been a few different questions in terms of early engagement with different parts of the supply chain and when different specialties and supply chain members should be being brought in. Is the idea that there'll be earlier engagement, and how will that work in your perfect worlds?
I'm happy to start that.
Yeah.
So certainly in the dialogue that we've had with NHP, one of the things that we're emphasising is that we do need a coordinated approach to finding solutions. And that does mean that we need the right people in the room to have those conversations. And that does mean bringing the supply chain in, because ultimately contractors will manage and listen to supply chain and put the program together around all of that thinking. So again, one of the challenges that we have, and we're insisting NHP do, is have an integrated approach to those conversations. So starting with the trust, designers, supply chain, contractors, and listening to each other's challenges, but actually then also understanding interfacing and creating opportunity and solutions from that. So my expectation is that I would like to see the NHP carrying out those types of workshops and those types of collaborations. But as part of forming the program, forming the alliance, forming the framework, whatever it looks like, that piece of work needs to be done very early doors and set our stall out and get the best value early.
Absolutely. Victoria, did you want to come in there, just so you unmute yourself?
Yes, yeah, very supportive of it, and the aspiration is that we bring in the right people as early as possible, because there's something around the risk approach that starts to reduce if we can bring people in earlier as well. So by bringing the supply chain involvement, the specialists in, there's something around where I think we have the opportunity to innovate whilst we're bringing in sooner. But also, as I say, I think there's a direct correlation with the our approach to risk in being able to reduce that instead of leaving everything to later through the programme.
I would say that, I mean, they have been engaging. Certainly, the time we were on the programme, there were market engagement days for MEP, particularly up at the MTC. So they have obviously, spotted the importance of mechanical electrical systems. They've spotted that, that supply chain is going to be a key part of that. So they have, I know, started to warm them up and started to get their thoughts and demonstrate some of the thinking. So yeah, they're already in the process, I think, of starting to look at key suppliers, and obviously companies like BAM have been coming in to kind of bring that kind of industry know-how, industry focus, industry concerns to the fore. So yeah, I think they have definitely been on this journey.
Just sort of in follow-up to some of those points from me, obviously, Corinne, you mentioned that there was a limited number of main contractors who, I think you said 7, and you were discussing that potential change in approach to make it work more attractive to regional, well, not even attractive, but possible for regional contractors. Are there other parts of the supply chain that you all see as have been potentially already pinched, where capacity needs to be expanded or reapproached?
Yeah, I think any building, but particularly hospitals, you look at the patient, everything that touches the patient, and it's MEP services, it's technology that will drive the performance of the hospital. And there's no doubt that there are challenges in the expertise and quantity of MEP, both from a supply and technical perspective. And that's why this standardization is so important, because actually, if you can look at, if you're looking at de-risking it, if you have standardization, actually you're changing the role of potential subcontractors. So actually you take away necessarily the high skill set that's required and make the project or the process of the project more simple. And if you make things more simple, you can actually then go into a wider range of resources and training and coaching and development of people, and not necessarily have as many specialists. So I think that's one challenge. I think certainly in my most recent experience over the last couple of years, and obviously some of this is an impact of COVID, but material supply has been quite challenging, certainly on things dry lining, those high quantum aspects that you get in these big major projects. And again, I think that's another opportunity to look at that. How do we procure those products? Just in time factories, looking at logistics networks and consolidating those. And if you collaborate as contractors and designers and projects, actually you can get some real benefits of scale there. We've seen people like Heathrow take that national logistics approach as an example. So yeah, don't know if anybody else got any more comments.
Yeah, if I can just build on the, I think the skills point is really important that you raised. So one of the things that made the platforms approach attractive to government was this idea that you could turn construction into a series of relatively simple components, relatively standardized, repeatable tasks. So the prototypes for some of the prisons work was actually carried out by prisoners in a live prison. So the idea was that you would use the building of the prisons program potentially to upskill a bunch of prisoners who would be less likely to reoffend, more likely to get work. So you get a massive societal benefit that way, but also by sort of de-skilling it or reducing the reliance on skilled trades that are in short supply, you diversify the workforce, you create new opportunities, you suddenly get opportunities for prisoners, ex-prisoners, ex-army, these sorts of things. And we have in the pharmaceutical space, we've actually delivered projects using ex-British Army teams that were trained to assemble these components. So again, the standardization thing potentially unlocks all of those things around diversification, reduction on skills, solves the skills crisis. So the size of the prize in that sense is absolutely vast as well.
Absolutely. Victoria, did you want to come in there at all?
Just a couple of bits picking up on what Jamie was saying, then, that the ability to link then the programmes link with social values. So as Jamie described there, how we could start to kind of really change and turn the tide on the skill shortage through a different approach. But also picking up on the more wide question around, maybe some pinch points, or is there enough capacity more broadly. I think key to that is that we're able to share the actual pipeline available to the supply chain, because then there's some confidence of where they're best placed and where they might want to invest and may want to come forward with their own products and where they can see themselves sitting. That's been a fundamental part missing, in that we haven't been able to share the pipeline to allow the supply chain to be prepared.
Absolutely. In terms of something else that you have all mentioned in passing in different ways, there has been a number of questions come in about risk and risk share, and a changing risk profile when we're talking about a platforms approach that is different to normal. How do you sort of see that being navigated in a program like this?
So again, it's the standardization. I mean, Corinne touched on this earlier, this sort of ability to refine the design lessons. So in normal construction, like, any lessons that are learned just evaporate because there's nowhere to put them. One of the benefits of, say, the prisons program was that as they're building more and more of these house blocks, they can optimize the process. Any lessons learned get built into the next generation of them. So you start to get into that continual improvement space rather than constant reinvention. So again, that's what standardization gives you, the ability to keep refining over time. And I think that's another huge benefit, that you don't start from a blank sheet of paper each time. You go, what did we learn last time? What can we improve? How do we make the next implementation of this much, much quicker, faster? So over time, it should dramatically reduce the risk, because by the time you're sort of into the next, third generation, there should be nothing left to learn. You should be, once you're above ground slab, you should be, very, very slick at delivering these things. So yeah, the opportunity is massively to de-risk these things through this approach.
I think just I think it was yourself, Jordan, mentioned it earlier. It's really important that NHP do make this attractive to the market. There's many boardrooms that have suffered a lot of pain through delivering high complex hospitals. So actually, my role is to find a solution actually that benefits the delivery of this program, but actually also means that BAM and anybody's business actually will invest and build that headroom into that investment to grow as well, because the program needs that growth. So answering the question about risk, I mean, we're having very simplistic conversations that we want fairer terms, we want incentivization, we want to be encouraged to create new ideas and benefit them for the benefit of the program and be incentivized on that way. And we also want sustainable margins. It's really important. I mean, doesn't we read the news every day, then another contractor is struggling, or another major MEP contractor is struggling. We've got to move out of this low-balling projects and actually looking at the value that every individual business brings to it, and measure that value and reward on that value. And also looking at how risk is shared and allocated. There's a lot of wastage in risk, but actually is the customer getting any of the benefit? Probably not, if you look at traditional contracting models. So again, Jamie mentioned it, Victoria mentioned it, there are alliancing models, there are different ways of managing NEC contracts, as an example, that actually produce a sound platform that actually, one, sets the culture and the transparency of working together, but also enables businesses to make the right level of profit to sustain their business and actually invest and then continue that improvement. That's absolutely critical. It has to be attractive for the sector.
Absolutely. Victoria, was there anything that you wanted to add on that one?
I don't think it's directly related to the risk question, Jordan, but it definitely picks up on the commerciality and the link between risk and commerciality that Colin was just talking about. And the incentivisation is key. And I think we can turn the tide on that, and thinking about, all three of us have talked about outcomes, not outputs. if we can think about the outcome, I think there's a way we're all working to a joint objective to get there, and therefore there's an incentive model that can go with that.
Absolutely, and that actually dovetails quite nicely in, because something that all of you have spoken about is the importance of collaboration and working together and shared learnings. And we've had a number of questions coming in and saying, that's all great, but how likely is that to actually happen when that's quite a cultural shift from, particularly you could say in like certain parts of the sector where it's quite adversarial traditionally. So I guess, how do we think we actually go about achieving that collaboration in practice?
I'm happy to start that conversation, and let's be frank. Everything's great at the start of the project, and then it comes down to financials, and there's a challenge, and suddenly there's a change in behaviour. That tends to be the key driver, and being very candid about that. So actually, that's why it's really, really important to have the fair commercial standing on it, but also the behaviours that listen to challenges and don't bury their head in the sand, and actually go, well, actually, if you've got a problem there, how can I help? Having that approach, how can I help? Because if I help you, I'm incentivized to get it right, and actually we all care about the project. That's really important. I think the second thing that I've experienced as well is deal with behaviors. If people don't behave the right way or in the spirit of the contract, or actually have the right approach, you have to educate, you have to mentor, you have to develop those individuals to get real change. Worst case is you take that individual out of a project team, because that's really, really important. But I would like to think that 99% of people that work in that environment get up in the morning and actually enjoy their job, because it isn't about having a fight or playing a commercial game. It's actually, how can we help each other? How can we make this work? And I know it's words, and I know it's really, really difficult, but actually, if you look and measure the success of other major projects, it is about how the teams integrate, how it's gelled, and it's how it's become interdependent on each other. And actually, that's why I keep referring to why the program is so important. Jamie said, if you do one-off projects, you don't take that learning, you don't take that improvement. It's the same for teams. You don't build better, higher performing teams on one-off projects. Get that consistency in that program approach, and at least you'll give yourself a chance.
I think it's incumbent upon all of us to be the catalyst for the change, with the need for collaboration. But picking up on what Corin said, it kind of starts off well, and then you encounter a problem. But this whole approach is that we actually go into this with our eyes wide open, so that we understand the brief's nailed down. It's not 80, it's not 50% we don't really know, and we're going to just start and then hope that we get there. We're going into it with our eyes open, with the brief secured, standardized designs that we know the realms and the bounds of what we're there to deliver on. So those issues should be less, and then the ones that do come up are more common for the industry, to allow us to respond with an industry response, so more around the ground conditions, etc., etc. And there's a way that I think we're already turning the tide on that. I would wholly support what Corin was saying, that coming together to find a solution is the way. And my experience of them delivering the Grange was exactly that. That there was a team that wanted to work together, and we encountered issues and problems, but it wasn't one organisation or one person's problems. How do we collectively come and find the solution, because we focus on the outcome?
Absolutely.
Yeah, if I can offer a perspective from the again, I'm going to sound like a broken record talking about the sort of prisons design and the reference design, but one thing we found was that by developing this kind of standardized design you could repeat, you could put tons more effort into optimizing the thing than any individual project could ever do. So we could spend a long time with all sorts of stakeholders with the MOJ. So we talked to prisoners themselves, we talked to prison support groups, we talked to the CNR teams, control and restraint teams, who have to sort of go in when there's incidents. We talked to the FM people. So we said to everyone, what are all the things that you wish someone had designed in or designed out at the earliest stages? Tell me all of the, the issues that you've had. Tell me all the things that will be a problem in sort of 10, 15 years. So inviting people to come in and contribute to that process and bring their expertise And obviously, normally the FM people don't get an input until the facility's live, and they're saying, "Well, I wouldn't have put that up there, and I wouldn't have done that." So, by using that kind of process and that orders of rationality diagram that I showed, one of the reasons we used that was so that people could imagine where they sit in that diagram. So supply chain go, I live in that hexagon, I can contribute there. Someone at a much more clinical strategic level might say, I play in this space. But by showing everyone how all the individual pieces fit together and that there was an opportunity for everyone to come in and contribute, I think having that sort of ability and inviting people to contribute is massively powerful. Firstly, because people then feel they've been listened to, but it just makes the design better and better, doesn't it? So yeah, that's what we saw in the Prisms program. And that was some of the thinking that hopefully has been embedded now within the program.
Brilliant. I'm very conscious we only have about 5 minutes left, and we've covered quite a lot of ground today. So I was going to ask each of our panelists if you give us 1 or 2 key points that you'd love the audience to walk away with just on this topic. And I'd also love to say thank you to our audience, and sorry to those of you whose questions I didn't go to. I think the number of questions that have come flying through shows not only the quality of our speakers, but also the amount of interest there is in the program at the moment. So maybe I'll start with you, Corin, because you spoke first. You can go first. Cab off the ranks now.
Well, thank you for everybody for joining. It's been a pleasure to be part of this panel today. I think really it's just have a think about how you can, as your business or your service, whatever you do, how can you do it differently to improve, the sort of traditional thinking, because we do need to do things differently. I think there's an opportunity to open every idea up and contribute. And I think there will be NHP further engagement, and just make sure you're a voice. Make sure you share your opinions and your ideas, because this is as I said at the beginning, it's a nice opportunity to wrap it up. This is once in a lifetime, and actually it's a once in a lifetime opportunity for you to sort of transition that change for this program and future programs.
Brilliant. Victoria?
Thanks, Jordan. I think key for me is that we keep engaging. The NHP need our help. They need to know how they can start to improve and also to start delivering on these schemes. So keep engaging, keep working with them, attending the market engagement events, etc., etc. I also think there's something to consider, that the tent needs to be big. We all need to be in it together, because there's a way that we all can interface and collaborate together. So bringing people together through connections through the whole supply chain is incumbent upon all of us.
Brilliant. And last but not least, Jamie?
It's always hard going last, isn't it? Everyone said the best stuff. No, I think just to reiterate what Corin said, like that once in a lifetime opportunity, like it really is that. Like healthcare touches literally everyone's lives. So this is a program that the potential upside, the potential impact on taxpayer and our health of the nation, everything is absolutely vast. And then you go, it's happening at a time when all of the government policy and strategy around platforms and things is in the right space. Like, this is the time when everything is perfectly aligned. Like, this is our opportunity to literally transform the way we deliver, not just healthcare, but all social infrastructure, all construction. So yeah, it's not just a once in a lifetime opportunity for health. This is, if we're not going to do it now, when are we going to do it? If we're not going to adopt these new processes, what else are we waiting for? So yeah, it's incredibly exciting. And as Corin and Victoria said, everyone who can contribute to this and has some thoughts should be trying to help this program and trying to bring all the best practice we possibly can to bear.
Brilliant. Thank you all so much. I'd love to say a huge thanks to Corin, Victoria and Jamie for their expertise and their time, both today and in preparation for today's session. We really appreciate having you take part. Once again, I'd love to say thank you to the audience. Any questions we didn't get to, I'm so sorry, but there was just so much interest in this one, I couldn't quite race through them all. We will, as I've said, but the questions are still coming in. Yes, you can rewatch this. You can access the slides on demand, and it'll just be via the same link. You just need to give us about half an hour to turn around the video and let it load up and everything. So from then on, it will be available for 12 months via the same link. I'll just mention now for our audience, we have another webinar this afternoon on healthcare as well. That's been run by our specification editor, Holly Tai. And that's about unpacking the use of biophilic design and designing for wellbeing in healthcare. And Holly's actually doing an interview with Martin Jones, director from BDP. So that's definitely worth a listen to. And if you're interested in education, we had 2 great education sessions yesterday that are available on demand. One about MMC and one about trying to tackle the issues in the education estate more broadly, which has become particularly topical in recent weeks. So that's it from me. A huge thank you again to everyone involved, and goodbye.
Thanks all.
Bye-bye.